Welcome to Brainish English Stories.
In this story, I'm talking about my friend Sherlock Holmes and all the interesting cases he's worked on. I'm going to focus more on the cases he solved successfully instead of the ones he couldn't. It's not just about his reputation, but because when he made mistakes, no one else could figure things out, and the mysteries stayed unsolved. But sometimes, even when he made errors, he still found the truth. I'll tell you about a few cases like that, and the two most interesting ones are the affair of the second stain and the one I'm about to share with you. Sherlock Holmes didn't exercise just for fun. He was a really strong guy and a great boxer, but he thought doing physical activities without a purpose was a waste of time. He only got active when he had a professional reason. When he was on a case, he worked tirelessly. It's surprising that he kept himself fit under those conditions. But he usually ate very little and lived a simple life. One spring day, he decided to take a walk with me in the park. We strolled around quietly, like two friends who know each other really well. We got back to our place on Baker Street around 5 in the evening. Our page boy opened the door and said, "Sorry, sir, but a man was looking for you." Holmes looked at me with a little annoyance and said, "Well, that's the end of our afternoon walk. Is the man still here?" The boy replied, "No, sir, he left." Holmes asked, "Did you invite him in?" "Yes, sir, I did." "How long did he wait?" "Half an hour, sir." He was quite impatient, walking around and tapping his foot. I could hear him from outside. Finally, he went into the hallway and said, "Is that man ever going to show up?" Those were his exact words, sir. "You'll have to wait a little longer," I told him. "I can't wait inside, I feel suffocated," he said. "I'll come back later." And with that, he left, and I couldn't stop him. Holmes said, "Well, you did your best," as we walked into our room. "It's frustrating, though, Watson. I really needed a case, and this man seemed impatient, which suggests it might be important. Look here. This isn't your pipe on the table, he must have left it behind. It's a nice old pipe with a long stem made of what they call amber. I wonder how many real amber pipes there are in London. Some people think finding a fly in it is a good sign. He must have been quite distracted to leave a pipe behind that he obviously values a lot." I asked, "How do you know he values it a lot?" Holmes explained, "Well, I'd say this pipe originally cost 7 and 6 pence. But as you can see, it's been repaired twice, once in the wooden stem and once in the amber part. Each of these repairs, with silver bands, must have cost more than the pipe did originally. The man must really care about this pipe if he's willing to fix it instead of getting a new one with the same money." I asked, "Is there anything else interesting about it?" Holmes held up the pipe and tapped it with his finger, as if he were a teacher talking about a bone. "Pipes can be quite fascinating," he said. "They have a lot of character, like watches and shoelaces. But in this case, there aren't any very obvious or important clues. The owner is obviously a strong man, left-handed, with good teeth, not very organized, and doesn't need to save money. My friend Sherlock Holmes shared some interesting observations with me. He did it casually, but I could tell he wanted to see if I understood his thinking. He said, "You think a man must be rich if he smokes a fancy 7-shilling pipe?" I replied, "This pipe costs a lot, right?" Holmes explained, "Well, this pipe uses expensive tobacco, called Grosvenor mixture, which costs 8 pence an ounce." Since he could get a similar smoking experience for less money, it means he doesn't have to be thrifty. I asked, "What else did you notice?" Holmes continued, "He lights his pipe with lamps or gas jets, and you can see it's charred on one side. A match couldn't do that. Why would someone put a match to their pipe? But if you light it at a lamp, the bowl gets charred. Plus, it's all on the right side of the pipe. So, I think he's left-handed. Try holding your own pipe to the lamp, and you'll see that you, as a right-handed person, naturally put the left side to the flame. You might do it differently occasionally, but not all the time. This has always been the case." And he's bitten through his amber, which takes a strong person with good teeth to do. But I think I hear him on the stairs now, so we'll have something more interesting than his pipe to study. Right after that, a tall young man walked into the room. He looked like he was in his 30s, even though he was a bit older. He said, "I'm sorry, I guess I should have knocked." "Yes, I should have knocked. I'm a bit upset, and it's all because of that." He ran his hand over his forehead, like someone who's confused, and then sat down on a chair. Holmes said, "I can see you haven't slept much lately. That can be tougher on someone's nerves than work or fun. How can I help you?" The man replied, "I need your advice, sir. I don't know what to do, and my life feels like it's falling apart." Holmes asked, "Do you want to hire me as a detective?" The man said, "Not just that. I want your opinion as a wise person, as someone who knows the world. I need to know what I should do next. I hope you can help me." He spoke in short, sharp sentences, and it seemed like speaking at all was painful for him. It looked like his determination was pushing him to talk. "It's a tricky situation," he said. "I don't like talking about personal problems with strangers. It's tough to discuss my wife's behavior with two people I've never met before. It's horrible to do this. But I've run out of options, and I need advice." Holmes said, "My dear Mr. Grant Monroe." The visitor jumped up and said, "What? You know my name?" Holmes smiled and said, "If you want to keep your identity a secret, maybe don't write your name inside your hat, or turn the hat when you talk to someone. My friend and I have heard many secrets in this room, and we've helped many people with their troubles. I hope we can do the same for you. Can you please tell us the details of your case quickly, as time might be important?" The visitor rubbed his forehead, looking pained. I could tell he was a reserved, private person who was more likely to hide his problems than share them. Then, suddenly, he clenched his fist as if he had decided to let go of his reserve and began to talk. "Here are the facts, Mr. Holmes," he said. "I've been married for 3 years. During that time, my wife and I loved each other deeply and had a happy life. We never argued or disagreed in any way. But since last Monday, something has come between us, and there's a part of her life and thoughts I know nothing about. We're distant now, and I want to know why. There's one thing I want to make very clear, Mr. Holmes. Effie loves me. There's no doubt about that. She loves me completely and even more now. I feel it, and I don't want to argue about that. It's easy for a man to tell when a woman loves him. But there's this secret between us, and we can't be the same until it's revealed." Holmes said, a bit impatiently, "Please, Mr. Monroe, tell me what you know about Effie's past." The man said, "I'll tell you about Effie. When I first met her, she was a young widow, only 25. She had gone to America when she was young and lived in Atlanta. She married a lawyer named Hebron there, and they had a child. Unfortunately, there was a terrible outbreak of yellow fever, and both her husband and child died from it. I've seen the death certificate. She was heartbroken by America and returned to live with her aunt in Pinner, Middlesex. I should mention that her husband left her financially comfortable with about £4,500, which he had invested wisely to earn an average of 7%. When I met her, she had only been at Pinner for 6 months, and we fell in love and got married a few weeks later." Mr. Grant Monroe explains more about his life. He's a hop merchant, which means he's in a business that deals with hops used in making beer. He has a good income, about £700 or £800 a year. He and his wife lived happily in a nice villa in Norbury, a place that felt quite rural despite being close to the city. His wife transferred all her money to him when they got married, even though he was hesitant about it. But about 6 weeks ago, she asked him for £100 without explaining why. He gave it to her, but it was the first time they had kept a secret from each other. Near their house was a cottage that had been empty for 8 months. One day, Mr. Monroe saw a van with carpets and things outside it, meaning someone had moved in. He noticed a strange, almost unnatural face watching him from an upper window. It gave him a weird feeling, and he decided to introduce himself to the new neighbors. However, a harsh woman answered the door rudely, so he left. That night, Mr. Monroe couldn't sleep well. He was usually a deep sleeper, but he felt uneasy. He half woke up when he noticed his wife getting ready and leaving the room in the middle of the night. She had a strange, pale look on her face. He heard her leave the house, and it worried him. He stayed awake, puzzled about what she was doing outside at that hour. About 20 minutes later, she returned, but she seemed guilty and nervous. Mr. Monroe asked her where she had been, and she was surprised he was awake. She gave an odd explanation about needing fresh air and feeling like she was choking. Her behavior made him suspicious, and he felt something was wrong. She avoided eye contact and seemed to be hiding something. He couldn't shake the feeling that his wife was keeping a secret from him. He didn't want to ask her again, but he couldn't stop thinking about it. He spent the whole night coming up with theories about what might be going on. On the day after the strange night when his wife left the house, Mr. Monroe felt too troubled to focus on work. His wife seemed uneasy too, and they hardly spoke during breakfast. He went for a walk to clear his mind. During his walk near their house, he passed the cottage where new neighbors had moved in. To his surprise, his wife came out of that cottage. He was shocked to see her and even more surprised by the look on her face when they made eye contact. She tried to act normal and told him she had just been helping the new neighbors. But Mr. Monroe was suspicious and asked her about her late-night outing. He accused her of lying, and her behavior seemed strange. She avoided looking at him and acted guilty. She begged him not to go inside the cottage, saying that their lives depended on it. She promised not to keep any more secrets if he would trust her this one time. Mr. Monroe agreed on the condition that there would be no more mysterious nighttime activities. He couldn't forget the yellow face he had seen in the cottage window, and he wanted answers. For a couple of days, things seemed to be back to normal. But on the third day, Mr. Monroe came home early and found his wife missing. The maid told him she had gone for a walk. He was suspicious and rushed to the cottage, where he saw the maid heading there as well. He knew something was wrong. He went inside the cottage without knocking, determined to uncover the truth. He found the cottage empty, except for one room that had a picture of his wife on the mantelpiece. This made him even more suspicious, and he was determined to get to the bottom of the mystery. After discovering the empty cottage, Mr. Monroe felt a heavy burden on his heart. His wife tried to explain but couldn't reveal everything. She promised not to keep secrets anymore. He left, and now he's seeking Holmes' help to solve this strange problem. Holmes thought the situation was suspicious and had many questions. He asked Mr. Monroe about the face he had seen at the window, the money his wife asked for, and her first husband in America. Holmes advised Mr. Monroe to return to the cottage to investigate further. If it was empty, they could discuss it the next day. But if it was still occupied, they should send a message, and Holmes would come to help immediately. Holmes believed that blackmail might be involved, and he had a theory that Mr. Monroe's wife's first husband might be hiding in the cottage. Watson asked Holmes if he had a theory. Holmes explained that he believes Mr. Monroe's wife had fled her first husband in America and assumed a new identity in England. Her first husband discovered her location and threatened her, leading to the current situation. Holmes expected that when they revisited the cottage, it might not be empty, and they could uncover the truth. "It's just a guess," Holmes said. "But it fits all the facts. If we get new facts that don't fit, we can change our guess. Right now, all we can do is wait for our friend in Norbury." We didn't have to wait long. The message arrived just after we finished our tea. It said, "The cottage is still occupied. I saw the face at the window again. I'll meet you at the 7 o'clock train, and we won't do anything until you arrive." Our friend was waiting for us at the platform, and we could see that he was very pale and nervous under the station's lights. "They're still there, Mr. Holmes," he said, gripping my friend's arm. "I saw lights in the cottage as I came down. We'll settle it once and for all now." "What's your plan, then?" Holmes asked as we walked down the dark road under the trees. "I'm going to force my way in and see who's in the house for myself. I want both of you to be witnesses." "You're determined to do this, even though your wife warned you it might be better not to solve the mystery?" Holmes inquired. "Yes, I'm determined," our friend replied. "Well, I think you're right. Any truth is better than not knowing. We're putting ourselves legally in the wrong, but I believe it's worth it." It was a very dark night, and a light rain began to fall as we left the main road and entered a narrow, deeply rutted lane with hedges on both sides. Mr. Grant Monroe pushed ahead impatiently, and we followed as best we could. "Those are the lights of my house," he whispered, pointing to a faint glow among the trees. "And here's the cottage I'm going to enter." We turned a corner in the lane, and the building was right in front of us. A yellow streak across the black foreground showed that the door wasn't completely closed, and one window on the upper floor was brightly lit. As we watched, we saw a dark shape moving behind the curtain. "That's the person," Grant Monroe exclaimed. "You can see for yourselves that someone is there. Now follow me, and we'll soon find out everything." We walked up to the door, but suddenly a woman appeared out of the shadows and stood in the light from the lamp. I couldn't see her face clearly in the darkness, but she stretched out her arms in a pleading gesture. "Please, Jack, don't do it," she pleaded. "I had a feeling you would come tonight. Think it over, dear. Trust me again, and you won't regret it." "I've trusted you for too long, Effie," he said firmly. "Let go of me. I need to pass. My friends and I are here to resolve this once and for all." He gently pushed her aside, and we followed closely behind him. He opened the door, and an old woman tried to block his way, but he pushed her aside. We all hurried up the stairs. Grant Monroe went into the well-lit room at the top, and we followed. It was a cozy, well-furnished room with 2 candles on the table and 2 on the mantelpiece. In the corner, a figure was hunched over a desk, appearing to be a little girl. Her face was turned away as we entered, but we could see that she was wearing a red dress and long white gloves. As she turned to face us, I let out a cry of surprise and shock. The face she showed us was an eerie shade of gray, with completely expressionless features. But in an instant, the mystery was solved. Holmes, with a laugh, reached behind the child's ear, and a mask came off, revealing a young black girl with a wide, amused grin on her face. I couldn't help but burst into laughter along with her, but Grant Monroe stood there staring, his hand gripping his throat. "Oh my God," he exclaimed. "What does this mean?" "I'll tell you what it means," the lady said as she entered the room with a proud, determined expression. "You forced me, against my better judgment, to reveal it, and now we must both face the truth. My husband died in Atlanta. My child survived. Your child? She took out a large silver locket from her chest. You've never seen this opened. I thought it didn't open. She pressed a hidden latch, and the locket opened to reveal a portrait of a remarkably handsome and intelligent-looking man, but with clear signs of his African heritage in his features. That's John Hebron from Atlanta, the lady said. And a nobler man never walked this earth. I severed ties with my own people to marry him, and I never regretted it during his lifetime. Unfortunately, our only child took after his family rather than mine. It often happens in such marriages, and little Lucy is darker than her father ever was. But whether dark or fair, she's my own precious girl, and her mother's darling. The little girl ran over to her mother's side at the words, snuggling up to her dress. When I left her in America, she continued, it was because her health was fragile, and the change might have harmed her. I entrusted her to a loyal Scottish woman who had once served us. I never once considered disowning her as my child. But when you came into my life, Jack, and I fell in love with you, I was afraid to tell you about my child. Forgive me, I feared I would lose you, and I didn't have the courage to tell you. I had to make a choice between you, and in my weakness, I turned away from my own little girl. For 3 years, I kept her existence hidden from you, but I heard from the nurse and knew she was doing well. However, I had an overwhelming desire to see my child again. I resisted it, but in vain. Even though I knew the risks, I decided to bring her here for a few weeks. I sent £100 to the nurse and instructed her about this cottage, so she could move in as a neighbor without any obvious connection to me. I went as far as ordering her to keep the child inside during the day and to cover up her face and hands, so that no one who saw her at the window would gossip about a black child in the neighborhood. I was so afraid that you would find out the truth, I was overly cautious. It was you who first told me that the cottage was occupied. I should have waited until morning, but I couldn't sleep because of my excitement. So I slipped out, knowing how difficult it is to wake you. But you saw me leave, and that's when my problems began. The next day, you had my secret, but you chose not to use it against me. However, 3 days later, the nurse and the child barely escaped through the back door as you burst in through the front. And now, tonight, you finally know the whole story. What will become of us, my child and me? She clasped her hands and awaited an answer. Grant Monroe didn't speak for a long 10 minutes. When he finally broke the silence, his response was one I'll always cherish. He lifted the little girl, kissed her, and then, still carrying her, extended his other hand to his wife as they headed toward the door. We can discuss it more comfortably at home, he said. I may not be a perfect man, Effie, but I believe I'm better than you've given me credit for. Holmes and I followed them down the lane, and as we emerged, Holmes tugged at my sleeve. I think, he said, we'll be more useful in London than in Norbury. He didn't mention the case again until late that night, when he was about to go to his bedroom with a lit candle. "Watson," he said, "if you ever think I'm becoming too confident in my abilities or not putting enough effort into a case, just whisper Norbury in my ear. I'll greatly appreciate it."